guys, welcome back. It's been a long time since I did any kind of real video in this channel, but I was going back through some of my old ones and it occurred to me that some videos just tend to age really well. I didn't necessarily, but the video did. This is me way back when, 2011? And I was making some videos at the time because I was going through a lot of things and I didn't necessarily understand PTSD at the time, but I did understand conditioning and I did kind of understand gaslighting. And I was going through some things with my family and just learning how to handle them and how to communicate with people, and mostly, especially like I'm talking about in this video, to make sure that I'm not letting my past and my conditioning affect my interactions with people in the present, because it's not their fault. And a lot of times the reaction I was having was disproportionate to the situation because I was being triggered and I just didn't know it. So in this video, I call it conditioning. Now I tend to refer to it as triggers, but it's basically the same thing. So I just wanted to watch it and maybe respond as I go.
Alright, so I'm going to do another short one. You know when I say that it's going to be long. There's no costume change because yes, it is the same day. I was reading a blog that someone posted this morning and regarding mindfulness.
By the way, for those of you that are interested, this was my brother's apartment at the time in Koreatown. Very similar to the one that I used to have there. And I was staying with him, basically sleeping on the couch. And while I was in LA, it was right before I moved back to Georgia. I had already packed up all of the store that I had run and sold all of that and had driven down to LA to see my cousin and my brother before I drove back to Georgia to start my new life. And I believe at the time I was already talking to at the time it was my future husband, now he's my ex, but, and I think he's probably the friend I'm referring to in the video, but all that aside, this is me in LA.
That's what they called it. And evidently there's some sort of a scientific study that somebody has done about this, and anyway, it seemed to me to describe the process that I am engaged in on a daily basis, in which my cousin also does a lot of, I think, where you have a past, everyone does, and a lot of times it affects your present and your future because it just does. And you react to things because of former stimuli and other situations, and I call it conditioning, but I think mindfulness is the way they describe the process by which you identify the conditioning. I'm always identifying. I preach about identifying all the time. You have to know what it is and why it is and how it is. You have to know everything about this thing. Because unless you know a thing, you can't predict it. You can't explain why it affects you. So for instance, I was recently in a conversation and I was tired and the other person was tired, and we both are dealing with our own issues, and I snapped. And I said something that I wouldn't normally say. I don't think that I was coming across the way that I meant to either. But it just seemed like both of us, I feel like both of us were dealing with conditioning at that moment. Conditioning on my part because of what they had just done that reminded me of my ex and the way he would do things and what he would have been doing and what he would have meant by what he did. And that's not exactly what my friend was doing. But it's an automatic. It's a reaction. Why do we react to things? And then if you react, then a lot of times they react back.
So this is huge, because no matter how well you understand this and how long you've been working on things and how self-aware you are, which is the other thing that I keep talking about is mindfulness, which I kind of forgotten about that term. Now I say self-aware a lot, because as long as you're aware of yourself and how you are in your present space and how you're responding and what reality you're living in your head, if you're living in a past reality, if you're living in your imagination based on the past reality. But this right here is still always going to be an issue. It's always going to be, I think, a struggle for me. But I have come a long way. And like right now in my current relationship, and hopefully the last one, we're doing really well. We pretty much have from day one. We've had our struggles, but I have from the very beginning entered this relationship with the understanding that I trust him, I know him, and anytime there's a conflict, I will always err to the side that it was an accident or a reaction because of a trigger on his part, because he's got all of his own crap and I've got all of my own crap. We all do. And some of it's more severe than others. And a lot of our stuff has to do with relational interactions that we've had growing up in past relationships, etc. So he has an intense fear of abandonment. And so do I, but in a different way. And for me, everything that he does and everything, all the energy he puts off, I pick up on the slightest change in energy, and it irritates him because how could I possibly know? Well, part of that is my conditioning from all of those years of having to know if a pin dropped, how to adjust our behavior to keep life at home fairly peaceful. So most of our issues come down to I react or I'm trying not to react. And even sometimes that lack of a reaction and how I handle the situation comes across and annoys him and triggers him into something. And then he reacts to that. And then it's just this chain reaction of reactions. And so what I've done a lot of in this relationship is as soon as I feel the chain reaction starting, I'm more aware of it than he is because I've been doing this longer. And I stop. And I've also learned that with him, the best thing to do is to just be quiet. It's not because he needs me to be quiet. It's because I know that he doesn't recognize what's going on. And the more I say, the more it's just going to snowball. Because I could be completely logical and reasonable and calm, but that just infuriates him further. So I've learned to just step back, give him his time and his space. Usually within an hour, he's chilled. He's had time to think about it, to process it a little bit and realize, that's what happened. And then we come together and we can talk about it and we're good. But I think really understanding what's going on, why that person is doing that and why I'm doing this is the key. Especially if you've got any kind of trauma in your past, and most everybody has at least a tiny, tiny bit. So anyway, what I'm talking about here and how I reacted to my friend and how they reacted back, and it's just a chain reaction often. And learning how to handle those chain reactions, I believe, is very key. And I'm glad to see that I knew that even then. I wasn't very good at it, but I knew it.
Based on their background or their current struggle. So if you're used to not being heard or you're used to feeling pushed around by other people, then if I say something that makes you feel attacked or pushed into a corner or being told what to do, then you're going to react to that. And that's what I feel like happened. And you don't always have to talk about it. Sometimes you just need to think about it and know why it happened, baby. And why you reacted that way. And it's just important for me to identify it, because otherwise it's just this, we got upset at each other the other day and you don't know why. There's always a reason why we say things and do things. Maybe we were just being mean, but a lot of the time I think we're just reacting to conditioning that we've had, situations that we're in that or used to be in that have produced a reaction in us. And if someone else presses that button or triggers us, it's all over. We're gonna respond exactly like we would have in the other situation, or like we wish we could have in the other situation. because this is
See, that's a key too, because often the way you react is because it's so important how you react or that you stop the chain before it gets out of control. Often now I find myself reacting in ways that I wish I could have as a small child. I wish I could have stood up for myself. I wish I could have said, no, that's that's disrespecting me just in general. And I'm not a huge one for disrespecting me. And I'm not like all, in people's faces about it. But I was severely disrespected my entire life. My opinion didn't matter. I was told it mattered, but if I ever had one, it was kind of, okay, you know. So you learn verbally, non-verbally, a lot of things. You learn to pick up on a lot of cues that are nonverbal. Um, in the emotional vacuum that I existed in, you fill it with emotions and usually they're negative ones because it's a vacuum. So you have to fill it with something and you don't have a lot to draw from. So you just fill it with your imaginary emotions. And so I lived a lot of my life in an imaginary world. And I fancied myself realistic. And to be fair, my realistic imaginary world was reflecting my reality. So I thought it was very realistic, my imaginary world. But now, if I operate according to my imaginary world and my past reality, it's not realistic at all because it's not reflecting the reality in the least. But it is reflecting my old reality. But a lot of times the way you react is either the way you always have, or it's the way, especially the safer you feel around somebody, the way that you should have reacted even as a child, the way you should have stood up for yourself, the way you should have not let people gaslight you, but you didn't know how. And also you were a lot more powerless at that point. A lot of the people that you needed to stand up to were people in positions of authority over you, and you didn't really have the space or the understanding or the support to be able to do that and still have a roof over your head, essentially. I'm sure I would have still had a roof over my head, but consequences aren't always physically apparent. So I almost always ended up with emotional abandonment. My partner dealt with a lot of physical abandonment, like actual abandonment. So I know I say actual. Emotional abandonment is also actual and real, but you know what I mean. Anyway, we're almost done, and I'm pretty sure the baby's about to wake up, so.
just the straw that broke the camel's back, even though it's a different person, just a different situation, not the same, you know. So I'm sure every one of us has those areas where we react to people's words or actions in a completely irrational and irrelevant manner. But it's not because we're reacting to that person or what they said. It's
Let's say I said at the time in an irrational or irrelevant manner. It's not irrational, though. And that's something I didn't understand at that point, that the way I was reacting was not irrational. Because rationale is based on fact, right? It's rational according to the reality that we've always lived in. So I'm reacting in a very rational manner for me, based on my past, based on my experiences. But I always used to think that it was irrational. So I'm being crazy. And the crazier you think you are, the more you make small, I can't remember the word right now, your own experience and your own reactions. And so you actually minimize yourself and the situation. And actually that doesn't help. It just helps you make it small enough to shove under a rug again. So you don't want to minimalize it. You want to see it and recognize it. And also it's like shutting the little kid inside of you up. Just shut him up again, like you always have and like everyone else always did. So it's not irrational. It just feels irrational because everybody else around you is looking at you like, I don't know why you would react that way. It's not logical. It is logical, though. It's just not logical in this present situation to the people around you because they can't see or know what's going on in here. So the more I talk about this, the crazier I feel like I sound. But some of you will get it and some of you won't, and that's okay. But I think a turning point for me was recognizing that the way I was reacting was not irrational, because I wanted so badly to be rational and logical in all of my dealings and be very level-headed, and I achieved that in the end. But that didn't actually help me get to the place where I am. I had to actually be okay with being emotional and reacting irrationally, and then saying, okay, this feels irrational. Why? What am I feeling or reacting from internally that is very rational, but has nothing to do with this situation? This just reminded me of it. And then looking at that and understanding the emotions and everything tied up within that, and the logic, the false logic, the false premises that I used to operate so much on because of how I was brought up to think and what I was brought up to think, that plays a huge role. So anyway.
Because it's up here. It's from before. And
Exactly.
this article I was reading was talking about, learning to not let it affect you. And I think the first step in that process is to identify it.
True.
Honestly, once I've identified it, and I've looked at it from every angle that I can think of, I can usually
There's always
let it
another
go.
angle.
And I'm always on the lookout after that for situations where I might be tempted to react in that same manner.
It's true.
But now I know why I'm feeling this way, and I can let it go without hurting the other person.
So I think it's important to recognize and identify so that next time you won't react in that way. I don't think it's necessarily so that you, in my mind at the time, I was trying to prevent bad behavior on my part. I was trying to stop reacting. I was trying to shut it down, but in a more permanent way, and in a way that I could still feel sane about. Instead of following a bunch of rules like you don't react and you don't get angry, which is something that I grew up with, was you basically didn't have emotions. You didn't feel. Anger was wrong. Feelings were suppressed, repressed. So I'm coming from a place here where I wanted to just basically, instead of just shutting all those things down, I wanted to understand what was going on, but not let it show outwardly, because I still didn't want to make a bad impression. I didn't want to take it out on the other person either. I really didn't want to hurt other people when it was all my stuff, and I didn't want it to bounce off of them and them have to deal with it too. But the reality is that a lot of times people do end up having to deal with it. But I would say that identifying and being aware of where you're coming from and what you're dealing with is huge, because then maybe the other person can kind of start to understand and help you as well.
And unintentionally. So, just a few thoughts.
Just a few.
They are fixing the apartment upstairs. Actually, they're fixing all the apartments. So there's a lot of banging and hammering going on up there. I have Nathan's food in the oven, so we're good to go. And I will talk to you guys soon.
All right. So anyway, I just wanted to take a second and look at that. And it's been a really long time since I looked at my old videos. When I first started making these, I was literally using a little iPod that had a camera. It was the first iPod that came out with a camera. So I bought one secondhand off of somebody, and used Wi-Fi and didn't have a phone plan for a really long time. And that's what I made these videos on, because it helped me to talk to the camera way before I started streaming and all of these things. Every time I keep coming back around to it, I'm like, this helps me process. It helps me think. It helps me to talk and bounce things off of a camera, essentially. Almost more than it helps me to talk to an actual person. Mostly because they tend to interrupt because they think they know where you're going, and then it just derails your train of thought. But it helps me, and I keep coming back to this, and it keeps helping me. I don't know why. I don't remember, oh yeah, that used to help me. Maybe I ought to try it again. Instead, I just stumble upon it as if by magic again. But I was doing this way back in 2011, and wow, I look young. I like my hair. And I like the sepia tone of the lighting in that room. It was really nice. But anyway, I just wanted to look back at that one and make a few comments from this decade back onto that decade. And I'm going to continue making a few videos here and there about issues like this, things that we used to talk about on the stream, if you know me from Twitch. But we're going to try to keep them shorter and sweeter, and here on YouTube probably, so that they can be searchable and so that I can find them years later and look at it and say, wow, that really didn't age well, or wow, it really did. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'm going to go get the baby because it's time for him to eat again. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.